September 26, 1983. Midnight has just passed in Moscow. In a bunker buried beneath the frozen soil south of the capital, a room hums with the sound of cooling fans and the clicking of teleprinters. The air smells like burnt coffee and cigarette smoke. 44-year-old Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov sits at a command console, watching columns of green text scroll across a cathode ray screen. He's been on shift for 3 hours. His job title is Deputy Chief of Operations at Serpukhov 15, a facility so classified that it doesn't appear on any civilian map. His real job is simpler to describe and far more terrible to consider. He watches a satellite network designed to detect American missiles. If those missiles launch, he must report it. And if he reports it, the Soviet Union will retaliate. The system he monitors is called OCO. It uses infrared sensors mounted on satellites in geostationary orbit to detect the heat bloom of intercontinental ballistic missile engines during launch. The computers process this data and feed it to his screen. The margin for human decision is thin. The margin for error, thinner still. At 0:14 local time, the alarm sounds. It's not subtle. A piercing siren fills the room. Red lights begin flashing across the console. The screen updates. Launch detected. A single missile has been launched from a base in the United States. Target trajectory, Soviet territory. Petrov's heart rate spikes, but his training takes over. He immediately checks secondary systems. He looks for corroboration. Ground-based radar stations haven't picked anything up yet, but they wouldn't. The missile is still climbing. The satellites see it first. That's the entire point of OCO. He has minutes, maybe less, to decide what to do. Then the system updates again. Launch detected. Second missile. His breath catches. Third missile. Fourth. Fifth. 5 American intercontinental ballistic missiles, according to OCO, are now in the air. Each one carries multiple nuclear warheads. The system confidence level reads high. The protocol is clear. Petrov must pick up the phone on his desk, a direct line to Soviet High Command, and report the attack. That report will climb the chain in seconds. It will reach the General Secretary. And the General Secretary will authorize a counterstrike before those missiles reach Soviet soil. Petrov does not pick up the phone. He sits there, staring at the screen, while the alarm screams and his subordinates look at him with wide eyes, waiting for the order. The decision they've trained for. The decision that will kill millions of people in less than 30 minutes. But something doesn't add up. 5 missiles. Not 50. Not 500. 5. The United States has thousands of nuclear warheads. If they were launching a first strike, if they decided to end the Soviet Union in a single coordinated blow, why would they send only 5? It makes no strategic sense. A real attack would be overwhelming, designed to destroy Soviet launch sites and command bunkers before retaliation was possible. 5 missiles wouldn't accomplish that. 5 missiles would guarantee Soviet survival. And Soviet revenge. Petrov's mind races. He considers the alternative. The system is wrong. But OCO is new. It's been operational for less than 2 years. It cost billions of rubles. It's supposed to be foolproof. Soviet engineers built it. Soviet leadership trusts it. And right now it's telling him that nuclear war has begun. He makes a choice. He picks up the phone, not to high command but to the ground radar operators. He asks them to confirm. They report nothing. No missiles. No launches. No radar contacts. But the satellites are still screaming their warnings. The computers still say, attack in progress. Petrov reports the alert as a system malfunction. He bets the world on his intuition. And then he waits. To understand what happened in that bunker, you need to understand the weapon Petrov was fighting. It wasn't a missile. It wasn't a bomb. It wasn't even an enemy. It was a system. A network of satellites, sensors, algorithms, and decision trees designed to compress the fog of war into a binary output. Yes or no. Launch or wait. Live or die. This is the invisible weapon of the Cold War. Automated early warning. For most of human history, war required time. Armies marched. Fleets sailed. Scouts reported. Commanders deliberated. Even the fastest attacks, surprise raids, dawn assaults, ambushes, unfolded over hours. There was time to think. Time to confirm. Time to make a decision based on something other than a flashing light on a screen. Nuclear weapons shattered that assumption. By 1983, an intercontinental ballistic missile launched from a silo in Montana could strike Moscow in less than 30 minutes. Submarine-launched missiles, fired from positions closer to Soviet shores, could arrive in under 10. There was no time to hold a meeting. No time to verify intelligence. No time to negotiate or de-escalate or reconsider. So both superpowers built systems to decide faster. The United States deployed the Ballistic Missile Early Warning System, massive radar installations in Alaska, Greenland, and the United Kingdom that scanned the horizon for incoming objects. The Soviets built OKO, which watched from space. These systems were marvels of engineering. They represented the cutting edge of sensor technology, computer processing, and orbital mechanics. But they shared a fatal flaw: they required absolute trust. When the alarm sounds, there's no second opinion. No time to consult experts or review the data or wait for additional confirmation. The system says the missiles are coming, and you either believe it or you don't. If you believe it and you're wrong, you've just started a nuclear war over a malfunction. If you don't believe it and you're right, you've saved the world. If you don't believe it and you're wrong, your country dies without fighting back. This is the paradox of automated early warning. It gives you the information you need to survive, but it also removes your ability to question that information. Petrov understood this better than most. He'd worked in the Soviet missile defense program for years. He'd helped design parts of OKO's software. He knew the system wasn't perfect. He knew that satellites could misinterpret sunlight reflecting off clouds. He knew that computers could misclassify objects. He knew that the pressure to avoid false negatives, to never miss a real attack, meant the system was biased toward false positives. Better to cry wolf than to miss the wolf entirely. But on the night of September 26th, he also knew something else. He knew that if he reported the alert and it turned out to be real, he would be a hero. He'd followed protocol. He'd done his duty. If he reported it and it turned out to be false, he could justify his actions. The system said launch. He passed the message up the chain. What happened next was someone else's responsibility. But if he didn't report it, if he dismissed the alarm as a malfunction and he was wrong, he'd be court-martialed. His name would be synonymous with the greatest military failure in Soviet history. The man who let Moscow burn. Every incentive pointed in the same direction: report the attack. He chose not to. The alarm eventually stopped. 30 minutes passed. No impacts. No fireballs. No reports of American missile launches from any other source. The ground radar stations confirmed what Petrov had suspected. Nothing was in the air. OKO had been wrong. But the incident didn't end there. An investigation was launched immediately. Soviet military leadership demanded answers. How could the most advanced early warning system in the world generate a false alarm of this magnitude? How could it report 5 separate missile launches with high confidence when no launches had occurred? The answer, when it finally emerged, was both simple and terrifying. Sunlight. The satellites in the OKO network detect missiles by sensing infrared radiation, the heat signature of rocket engines burning. On that particular night, the satellite that triggered the alarm had been positioned in such a way that sunlight reflected off high-altitude clouds at precisely the right angle to mimic the infrared profile of a missile launch. The computer algorithms interpreted this reflected light as engine exhaust. The system, operating exactly as designed, reported an attack. It wasn't a software bug. It wasn't a hardware failure. It was an edge case, a rare alignment of orbital mechanics, atmospheric conditions, and sensor geometry that the designers hadn't fully anticipated. In other words, OKO worked perfectly. And that perfect operation nearly ended the world. This reveals something crucial about invisible weapons. They don't fail the way traditional weapons fail. A rifle jams. A tank throws a track. A bomber runs out of fuel. These are mechanical failures. They're visible. They're understandable. But an automated system can fail logically. It can follow its programming to the letter and still produce catastrophic results because the world is messier than the model. Because reality contains scenarios the designers didn't imagine. Because the difference between a missile launch and reflected sunlight is, at the level of raw sensor data, a matter of interpretation. And interpretation requires judgment. This is the weapon Petrov fought. A system that couldn't be reasoned with, couldn't be negotiated with, couldn't see beyond its own programming. A system that presented itself as infallible precisely because it lacked the capacity to doubt itself. He defeated it by refusing to let it make the decision for him. Stanislav Petrov did not receive a medal. He received a reprimand. In the aftermath of the false alarm, Soviet military leadership was furious, not at the system but at the man who'd questioned it. Petrov had violated protocol. He'd inserted his personal judgment into a process designed to eliminate personal judgment. He delayed reporting an alert that the system had designated as high confidence. The fact that he'd been correct was almost beside the point. The official investigation noted deficiencies in his paperwork. He'd failed to properly document his reasoning during the incident. He'd made his decision too quickly, without following the prescribed checklist for verifying system alerts. The implication was clear: he'd gotten lucky. Next time he might not. Petrov was reassigned to a less sensitive position. He retired from the military in 1984, less than a year after the incident. For more than a decade, his story remained classified. The Soviet government never officially acknowledged the false alarm. OKO continued operating. The doctrine of launch on warning remained in effect. It wasn't until the mid-1990s, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, that Petrov's role became public knowledge. Western journalists uncovered the incident through interviews with former Soviet military personnel. Petrov himself confirmed the basic facts but avoided claiming credit. In interviews he insisted he'd simply done his job. He'd assessed the situation and made the logical choice. But others saw it differently. In 2006, the Association of World Citizens honored Petrov with an award recognizing his contribution to the survival of humanity. A documentary filmmaker tracked him down in a small apartment outside Moscow, living on a pension of a few $100s a month. Petrov appeared uncomfortable with the attention. He maintained that he wasn't a hero. He'd just been in the right place at the right time. That humility obscures a deeper truth. Petrov's heroism wasn't about courage in the traditional sense. He didn't charge a fortified position. He didn't volunteer for a suicide mission. He didn't sacrifice himself to save others. His heroism was intellectual. He looked at a situation where every visible piece of evidence pointed in one direction and he asked, "Does this make sense?" He had minutes to decide. He had no way to verify his intuition. He had every institutional incentive to trust the machine. And he chose to trust his reasoning instead. This is a form of bravery we rarely celebrate. The courage to doubt authority when authority seems certain. The OKO system was decommissioned in 2015. Its replacement, known as EKS, uses more advanced satellites and updated algorithms designed to reduce false alarms. The United States operates similar systems: the Space-Based Infrared System and the Defense Support Program. These networks cost billions of dollars and employ thousands of engineers. They represent the pinnacle of detection technology. They are still not perfect. In 1995, Russian early warning systems detected a missile launch off the coast of Norway. Russian President Boris Yeltsin activated the nuclear briefcase, a portable command terminal that allows the Russian leader to authorize a retaliatory strike. The missile turned out to be a Norwegian scientific rocket studying the aurora borealis. Norway had notified Russia of the launch in advance, but the message hadn't reached the right people. In 2010, U.S. early warning systems temporarily lost contact with 50 intercontinental ballistic missiles due to a computer malfunction at an Air Force base in Wyoming. For nearly an hour, the command center couldn't confirm the status or location of weapons capable of destroying continents. In 2020, a software error caused a British nuclear submarine to surface and run diagnostics in the middle of the Atlantic after onboard systems reported a fault that didn't exist. These incidents didn't start wars because human operators like Petrov questioned the data and demanded verification. But the margin between crisis and catastrophe remains thin. The systems grow more complex. The decision windows grow shorter. The pressure to trust automation grows stronger. And here's what makes this invisible weapon so dangerous: we're building more of them. Automated systems now guide financial markets, capable of executing billions of trades in milliseconds based on algorithmic predictions. Facial recognition networks scan crowds, flagging individuals based on pattern-matching software that even the developers don't fully understand. Predictive policing tools tell officers where crimes are likely to occur, based on historical data that may encode historical biases. These systems promise efficiency. They promise objectivity. They promise to remove the messy, error-prone element of human judgment from critical decisions. But Petrov's story teaches us something different. It teaches us that the most dangerous moment isn't when the machine fails. It's when the machine succeeds, when it performs exactly as programmed, presents its conclusion with absolute confidence, and leaves no room for doubt. Because in that moment, the human operator faces a choice: trust the system or trust yourself. And if you choose wrong, the consequences can be irreversible. There's a detail about that night in September 1983 that often gets overlooked. When the alarm first sounded, Petrov had to make a decision. But he didn't make it alone. There were other officers in the room. Subordinates, technicians, people who could see the same flashing red lights, hear the same alarm, read the same data on the screens. None of them contradicted the system. They waited for Petrov to decide. And when he declared it a malfunction, they accepted his judgment, not because they had additional evidence, but because he was willing to take responsibility for the decision. This is the paradox at the heart of automated systems. They require human oversight, but they undermine the very qualities that make human oversight effective. They present information with such apparent certainty that questioning it feels irrational. They operate at speeds that make deliberation difficult. They shift responsibility from the person to the process, so that following protocol becomes a form of moral absolution. Petrov broke that pattern. He reasserted the one capability that no machine possesses, the ability to say, "This doesn't make sense," and act on that doubt even when the cost of being wrong is unthinkable. That's the invisible weapon he defeated, not with technology but with something older and more fragile: human judgment under pressure. Stanislav Petrov died in 2017, at the age of 77. His obituaries appeared in major newspapers around the world. They called him, "the man who saved the world." He would have hated that phrase. In his final interviews, he maintained that he'd simply done what anyone would have done in his position. But history suggests otherwise. Most people trust the system. Most people follow the protocol. Most people assume that if the alarm is sounding, there must be a good reason. Petrov didn't. And because of that, because one officer in a bunker beneath Moscow chose to think rather than obey, to question rather than comply, to risk his career rather than risk the world, you and I are alive to hear this story. The invisible weapon of automated certainty didn't fire that night. Not because it wasn't loaded, but because someone refused to pull the trigger.